Welcome to Classroom 2 Courtroom. Here's your host, Scott Benton.
Hey everyone, Scott Benton here. I'm the host of the Classroom 2 Courtroom Podcast, where we help you easily transition from law school as a student into your professional career as an attorney, and where we even make the practice of law fun. Go figure if we can do that, and it is fun. Today we are going to talk about how much evidence do you need to win a case. Now, when you're working in litigation and you get to a point where you're in a hearing or you're in a trial in front of a judge, you want to really have several different types of evidence available and several different pieces of those several different types of evidence that are all solid and they all point in the same direction, concluding your point in order to win the case. Now, that really translates into an absolute mountain of evidence. In trials, there's this idea of meeting the clear and convincing standard, which is actually a level that's impossible to reach. But it's what you're aiming for. It's where you're trying to hit. It's not just with a few pieces of evidence, but layers and layers of evidence. In fact, right when you think you have enough evidence to present, there's going to be this sort of temptation to stop collecting it. But as the case is not over yet, you don't want to stop collecting evidence because you don't know what the outcome of the case is going to be. But in order for you to become the best attorney possible, now this is really where the good attorneys are separated from the great attorneys. And you don't want to merely be a good attorney, you want to be a great attorney. And you are going to reach that point during the case where you're collecting evidence and you feel, you know what, we have enough here, but you need to remember to keep going. And you want to get another layer of evidence on top of the layer, or hopefully layers of evidence that you already have. And then once you have that, if the trial is still going and you've been collecting evidence, you want yet another layer on top of all of those other layers. Although you're never going to reach that impossible finish line of the clear and convincing standard, you're still going to get as close as you possibly can. And you're going to do that because you want to cut off any areas of reasonable doubt that you can, that the other side can justify. You want to block off their strategies, so to speak. And that's what that layer upon layer of evidence strategy is really going to accomplish. You're going to make it impossible for the other side to tear away or pick down your argument by using flimsy evidence, or sometimes you just have one kind of layer of evidence that they're going to find a vulnerable spot in order to break through. Now, if you have layer after layer, you have all of that added protection built into your case so that they're not going to really have an easy time of breaking through your argument. So in other words, you might feel that you want to become confident at some point with your evidence, and now you're going to get a little bit lazy because you have this evidence and you feel a little overly confident, but this is precisely the point in time when you want to remain vigilant. You want to keep going after that evidence. You need to keep looking and keep digging because, again, that's what's going to set you apart from other trial attorneys who really have lesser or even more mediocre skills than you do. And that's not you. You have strong skills that are going to allow you to prevail in any kind of hearing or any kind of trial. And this is how you do it with this layering method. As an example of what I'm talking about here with this layering method, you might be familiar with a film that came out, it was a 1992 film, came out of 20th Century Fox. It's a movie called My Cousin Vinny, and it stars Joe Pesci and Marissa Tomei and Ralph Macchio, where Vinny, the Joe Pesci character, he's an attorney who travels to Alabama to get his cousin, who's Ralph Macchio, and his cousin's friend out of jail. They've both been wrongly accused of murder. And in spite of Vinny having practiced only for 5 weeks, as we learn in the movie, in this point in his career, he's only been at it for 5 weeks, and he really has no trial experience whatsoever. Vinny's able to stockpile so much evidence on top of evidence that in the final courtroom scene, that essentially the state prosecutor who's prosecuting the Ralph Macchio character and Ralph Macchio's friend, he has no choice but to drop all charges, and Vinny ultimately wins the case. And Vinny wins the case because of precisely this same layering method that he ends up doing. And to do this, the first thing Vinny does, this is the final courtroom scene, so you can fast forward to it if you want. You can even find this clip on YouTube and play it. So if you haven't seen the movie, and you should, it's a great film. But if you haven't seen it, you can go check out that scene. Just go onto YouTube and watch it after you have finished watching this podcast episode. But to do this, the first thing Vinny does is he calls in his fiancee, Lisa, and Lisa's played by Marissa Tomei. And Vinny explains to the court, this is his exact quote, he says, "This witness is an expert in the field of automobiles and is being called to rebut the testimony of George Wilbur." And for context, George Wilbur is the automotive expert in the movie. He's an expert witness that the prosecution has brought in to prove that the Ralph Macchio character and Ralph Macchio's friend are both guilty of this murder conviction. Now, from there, Vinny has Lisa use her vast knowledge of automobiles to explain the tire tracks in a picture that she's looking at. And she says that those tire tracks could not have possibly been made by the car that the defendants were driving, because the car the defendants were driving couldn't have made those tire tracks because the car that made the tire tracks had independent traction based on the pattern of those tire tracks. And she says that the car that the defendants were driving did not have independent traction. And she names the type of car and the year and the make and the model of the car that would have made those tracks. And she says that car is very different, but it's similar in appearance to the car that the defendants were driving. Both cars, I think they're both made by General Motors, GM. So there were a lot of similarities. But Vinny doesn't really stop there. He next recalls George Wilbur to the stand. Now, George Wilbur, as I said, he is the expert witness in automobiles that the prosecutor had brought in. And George verifies that Lisa's testimony is correct. And he establishes Lisa as a credible expert witness at that point. Now, Vinny could have stopped there, but he doesn't stop, remember, because he's layering his evidence. Now, Vinny then calls in the sheriff because Vinny wants to get the jury beyond that point of reasonable doubt. He wants to move his entire argument as far into beyond reasonable doubt as possible. And so he brings in the sheriff. And Vinny previously, there's a scene where Vinny asks the sheriff to go look up the same make and model car that Lisa had testified about to see if there were any traffic infractions or any reports of that car being in any of the counties nearby in the last couple of weeks, and that could have made those tire marks. Now, furthermore, the sheriff says he did some additional digging around, and he found that there were two people who were arrested in a car that matches the description that Lisa had given testimony on, and the two people that had been arrested, they actually matched the description of the defendants in the courtroom, Ralph Macchio and Ralph Macchio's friend. And the sheriff says that the other two people happen to have the same .357 Magnum that was used, the same kind of gun that was used in the murder that the defendants were on trial for. So you see, it's that kind of layering, just over and over again, that type of layering of evidence that you want to have when you go into a trial. And this is why you want to continually collect more and more evidence all the way through the trial until there's been a decision made, until the case is closed, because you're going to just establish more and more credibility to the argument in your case. And you're going to make it harder for the other side to poke holes in it. So you really never want to stop looking for new evidence, and make sure that you're going in there as armed as possible, the way that Vinny goes into his courtroom scene in the 1992 film by 20th Century Fox, My Cousin Vinny. Definitely watch that movie if you haven't. It's a great film. I think Marissa Tomei won an Oscar for Best Actress, if I remember correctly. It's a long time ago. I hope that this answers the question of how much evidence do you need in order to win a case? And the answer is that you need an endless amount of evidence, layer after layer, to win a case, and that you never, ever stop collecting it until the case has been decided. So in short, if you want to use the My Cousin Vinny idea in your own cases, then you're only going to strengthen everything about your argument, and you're going to have a much better chance of winning. You want to layer as much as you can on top of the evidence you already have so you can get as close as you can to the impossible to reach level of clear and convincing evidence. So I hope that's helpful, especially if you're planning on going into litigation. You're really going to want to watch that movie and use that strategy. I'm Scott Benton. I'm the host of the Classroom to Courtroom podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Now, if you like this podcast and you'd like to get notified whenever we put out a new episode, you can go to our website. Our website is classroom2courtroom.com. That's classroom, the number 2, courtroom.com. You can put in your contact information and you will get an alert whenever we put out a new episode. And if you do like this material and you're finding it valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And that way you'll stay on top of all of our newest episodes and help spread the word. And until next time, we hope you'll join us in making the world a better place, one client at a time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on Classroom 2 Courtroom, the podcast designed to help launch your first-time legal career. If you have any feedback or ideas for episodes you'd like to hear, you can always find us at classroom2courtroom.com, where you can leave comments, ask questions, and even join our online community. And always remember, by becoming an excellent and confident practicing attorney, you actually make the world a better place. Now get out there and master the art of practicing law.